All right, thank you for joining us for another HRAI Insider webinar. Today we have top hiring mistakes with Larry Smith, founder and president of Cathburn Management. He's going to be taking us through just the things you should look for to build an an awesome team. I'm going to ask Larry to turn on his computer at this point. Camera. There
Here
he
we
is.
go.
There he is. Thank you so much, Larry, for joining us. I think we got a good presentation up ahead. Just a few housekeeping items. Larry is taking questions throughout the presentation, so if you have any at any point, pop them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or you can put them in chat there too, and one of us will find them there. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it to the man in charge. Take it away.
Okay, thanks very much, Matt. Welcome,
you.
Everybody. Yes, I'm happy to have a few minutes here to talk to you about some of my interesting experiences as a recruiter and a headhunter. Sometimes we're called. We don't mind that, and sometimes the mistakes that are made. And I want to just start with I guess with sort of the basics of business, really. And I keep saying, that when you get right down to it, there's really only three things that are at the bottom of all of business. And one is time. We only have 724. We're all equal in that regard. We can either use our time wisely or not. And the other is money, which and more than just the word money, I mean cash. Cash is needed it's the grease of business. I mean, there's lots of businesses have been profitable that have actually gone bankrupt because they just didn't have access to cash at the right time. And then there's people, and it's as crucial as having cash available. And if you have the right people, oftentimes you can get the cash and the financial situation that you need. Now, one of the things that I'm sure is on all of your minds, and it certainly was on the mind of a person who called me a number of years ago, and that's, can you go moose hunting? And this stems from a call that I received a number of years ago by a fellow who was in a contracting business. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he said, well, I can't go moose hunting. And I said, well, I'm not sure how I can help you with that. And when I asked further, I found out that, he was running a mid-size contracting firm, and he liked to go up north for 2 weeks every year with his buddies, and he couldn't go because he had no one to take his place. He had, I don't know, like 10 trucks on the road. He was the guy that kept everything together. He was the glue. He did sales. He did the finance part. He supervised everybody, and there was no one to stand in for him. So quite clearly, he needed a number two. And that's often the case with a smaller mid-sized business. There's no number two, and the boss, the owner, is doing everything. So it just shows you that getting the right people on the bus is critically important, and not just anyone. I mean, you really have to have the right people, in the right role. And that is part of the problem, is thinking it through at the beginning as to exactly who I'm looking for. I can't tell you, how many times, it's always amazing to me, but how many times when we start off on a new search for a client, that somehow within the first 30 days, the whole thing changes. Because now, once they're into it and they start seeing real candidates, they start to think, oh my goodness, this is not exactly what I need. I need something different. I need either more of it or less of it or something completely different. And so, we're ready for that. I'd say half the time there's a major change in the first 30 days of a search because the client is now seriously thinking about what he should have thought about at the beginning. So when hiring someone, we've got to think of what the potential problems are of a mistake. And the costs are serious. I mean, there really is quite a loss of time. We say, look, it's probably going to take you a year to recover from this. The time you took to do the original search, do the interviewing, put the offer out, get the person on board, go through training, and then, several months later, you start to have a bad feeling about this. And then you finally decide you've got to terminate this person. and then start the whole process all over again, it can get pretty close to a year. And uh, um, the more senior the person is, the more of a hole they're going to leave because they've affected more people. If you're at the top of the organization, I mean, it's really, you've got everybody in the company that knows what you've done. You've also got customers. You may have outside, vendors, people in the government that also are aware that this big mistake has been made, and it's a real loss of reputation and a loss of trust. So how do you go about, putting new people on your team? Well, I mean, we quite honestly tell them that, your first thought should be grow your own, and train from within. I mean, there's nothing more wonderful in our organization to see people moving up. And when you move someone from, say, an acting role or an individual contributor role to becoming the supervisor, well, that creates a hole for someone else to be hired probably from outside to be that, frontline role. And if someone is promoted from supervisor or manager, guess what? That creates an opportunity for someone to be promoted into the supervisor role, and so on. And if you can get that moving smoothly through your organization, it makes everybody feel good. This is a place where people can get ahead. Now, oftentimes that isn't possible because either there's too many requirements for people at different levels, and there's just not enough people in the organization to supply them all, or the jump is too big. Like there's just nobody that can make that step up to the next level. And so that's when you need to go outside. So how do you go outside? Well, again, we say, if you can do it yourself, go ahead, save the money. But when you do it yourself, you're probably only dealing with a thin slice of the market. You're probably going to do it by word of mouth. You're going to put the word out to people or you're going to put a job ad on Indeed or Workopolis or LinkedIn or something. And who you're really appealing to when you do that is this green slice of the pie. They're actively looking. They're the ones that are on it every day, seeing what's available. It's a lot of work. I mean, for people that are between jobs, it's a full-time job to get your next job. So if you're not in that situation, you probably don't have a lot of time to do it. You're busy, you've got a job, you've got a couple of kids, all the activities that go on with a family. So you've got the active people. You may have some people that are casually looking, maybe on weekends. They have a look and see what's come up and there's any new jobs available. And then you've got the passive people that are, well, they wouldn't mind a different job, but if somebody, a friend mentions something or they hear about something on the news, maybe they will reach out and do that, but they're not really working on it.
Hey,
And then
Larry.
you've got quite a large group that is really not looking at all because they're busy, they're not that unhappy, and they're ready to go forward.
Larry, we got a question
Yeah, sure.
coming in for you. And this might be something you're going to come up to in a second, but what are the best questions to ask references to get good insights on a candidate? I don't know if you want to save this to the end or if this works into your presentation or.
Are you talking about like a reference?
Yeah, so when you phone up a reference or you call a
Yeah.
reference, what are the best questions to get insights on your candidate?
Well, yeah, we've got actually a format we use for reference. Oftentimes, I'd say 95% of the time, our clients ask us to do the reference checks. And the way we like to approach it is when the client has a candidate that they want to hire, then okay, we recommend they put forward an offer. And there's many versions. I mean, I've seen offers that are 1 page long. I've seen them that are 20 pages long. The offer actually is the contract. It's not two things. It's not an offer and then a contract. It's the employment agreement. That's what that is. And so there's no such thing as say, hey, Fred, come on board. It's going to be 65,000, 5 days a week. Welcome aboard. And then when the guy arrives for the job, you hand him a 20-page agreement to sign. No, I'm sorry. You made the agreement when you made the verbal offer. You can't start all over. So you got to do it right the first time. or you're going to have could potentially have legal problems. So we suggest that the offer go out and it be conditional on references, that the candidate has to provide references acceptable to you. And also, we want to get them to sign that and send it back, and then they're committed and you're not. So you, the client, still have the chance, regardless of what the references finally say, even if they're wonderful, you could still reject them if you decide to change your mind. So it gives you an edge in the process. And then when we usually do those reference checks, we like to ask the candidate for 2 former employers, a couple of peers that worked beside them. And if they've been a manager, we like to also have 1 or 2 people that reported to them. So we have a real 360 on what that person was like. And we have a format of questions we go through, and we try to make them open-ended so they're not easily answered by yes, no answers. We certainly want to confirm places of employment and dates so that it lines up with the resume. But we'll ask things, depending on what the role is, like how that person differentiated themselves from other people in similar roles that this person might have been familiar with in the past. Was this person, and we listen for the tone, and we listen for what I call people being damned with faint praise. Well, yeah, Matt, yeah, he was here most of the time. He was okay. Yeah, he was okay.
Yeah.
That is deadly. If you hear that, like, it's bad.
Good luck with
And
them.
then, of
Yeah.
course, we have a number of questions like that. And then the final one, of course, is if you had the opportunity to hire this person again, would you? And anything short of wild enthusiasm is really not that good.
Interesting.
So
Great.
that's how that works.
Thanks so
So
much, Larry.
anyway, what
Yeah.
I'm saying is here with this pie thing is that if you're doing it yourself, which we encourage, save money. If you're dealing with the green and the yellow groups, you're missing out on the reds and the blues, which is the group that we don't miss out on, because we actively reach out to everyone that looks like they could be a good fit for this role. And we hit them up with, well, look, I know you're happy where you are, but we've got a role here that could be more money, could be more career opportunities down the road, and maybe it's closer to home. If it's a role where you actually have to go to the office these days, having it nearer to home is an advantage. So any one of those 3 things, sorry, I lost my pie. Any one of those 3 things can be interesting to a candidate. And if we call 50 people with that pitch, we're going to get 10 or 15 that say, you know what, yeah, it's worth thinking about, tell me more. And then we've got a group that now they're interested. We can decide more deeply whether we're interested in them, and drive that down to 3 or 4 that we really like, that we can present to our client. So that's how our process works, and how our process actively chasing people is different than just standing back and waiting for people to apply to a job ad. So let's go through the kind of mistakes that we've come across in the years that we've been doing this. And one of them is what we call undersizing the job. This is where you're going out and you're hiring a supervisor, let's say, into a role, and you're looking for someone who meets the qualifications for the supervisory role, and that's it. But what you should be thinking about, and this is particularly true of a fast-growing organization, is does this person have the capability within, say, 2 years to step up and be a manager and have more people? Instead of supervising 2 people, now they've got 10. And do they have the brain power and the personality to do that? Because if you don't think that way, you hire the person who's barely capable, is capable, but just barely so for the supervisor role. Then when it comes time that you need a manager, you're going to have to go outside again. Whereas it would have been nice to be able to promote that person up into that job, creating a hole for some below for the supervisor, maybe to promote someone from below them up and creating a nice flow through your organization. So if you don't do that, you get people in certain roles that can be roadblocks to the organization, and it really causes a problem, and would cause people below them to get frustrated and eventually leave because they don't see any hope for ever being promoted, because that person is stuck there. They're not moving, they're not retiring in the next 15 years. So why should I stay here? Another mistake, which is really deadly, is not moving quickly. We tell people that if you're not ready to pursue this process with energy and enthusiasm, then don't start. Don't casually start trying to fill a role. Just sit back and wait until you are ready. Because once it starts, then you start developing candidates, whether you do it yourself or we do it, you start developing candidates and their clocks are all ticking, because good candidates really take a portfolio approach to a job search. In other words, they are trying to open up 5 or 6 opportunities simultaneously. And what their goal is to go through the process, go to interviews, talk people up, and have a number of them moving forward at different levels. And they'll say to me, oh yeah, I'm on interview 1 with this one. I'm in interview 3 with this one. I'm hoping for a job offer on this one next week. And so they're moving forward in parallel. And of course, in their world, the perfect thing is they get 3 job offers on the same day, and then they can compare them and pick the best one. So that's not, from a client perspective, that's not what we want. We want to move quickly, have the best person, and give them an offer when they have no other offers. So that's what we want to do. And another way I like to express it is like if you're fishing and you've hauled all these fish into the boat, and they're at various qualities. The grade A fish are very lively, and if you don't move quickly, they're liable to jump right back out of the boat, back into the water. The B fish may struggle a little longer to get out of the boat if you take forever. The C fish are lying half dead on the floor of the boat. They're never getting out. They'll always be around. And if you take your time too long, the only pool you'll be looking at is the C fish. And that's really not what you want to do. So another mistake is not contacting your competitors. I mean, let's face it, the people that really know your business are the ones that are working against you. And those are the ones that would be great to hire. I mean, why not hire the enemy and have them be on your team if they're good? So you miss that completely, unless it's by blind luck and you post an ad and your competitors' employees apply. That's great. But we actively go after them and try to persuade them to come on board to our client's team. And well, this is really a reiteration of an earlier statement of candidates who are passive, not looking. Job ads really don't get at them, and they could well get excited about a job opportunity if they knew it existed. If they don't know it exists, they can't get excited about it. Another one is like there's in the organization, anything that's more than only a few people. Mid-sized organization, there's a decision maker, maybe the boss, the owner, and maybe someone else has been delegated to, if you're doing a job ad, say, you put a job ad in, and depending on the role, I mean, you could get 100 applicants. Other ones, you're lucky if you get any. But in the case of having many applicants, someone has to screen those and decide, oh, this person's not a fit at all. Put them in the discard pile. These persons are interesting. We should forward them to the boss to see if he's interested. The problem sometimes is that the screener doesn't have enough experience to know how to identify a good candidate from a bad candidate. Sometimes good candidates can look a little odd, and maybe their most recent experience isn't exactly what is in your line of work, but its earlier experience was, or is close enough that it's really not the actual practical, detailed work that you're looking for. It's the ability and the know-how to be trained into that work. And sometimes that escapes the screener. So the best person to do the screening would be the decision maker, except you know what? They're too busy to go through all that pile of stuff. So those mix of roles sometimes causes a problem. When the way we approach it is we're the screeners, and we're the ones to create the list that goes to the decision maker so that we know we haven't missed anyone who would be good, and they can concentrate their time on just interviewing the 3 or 4 best candidates for the role. Another one is that, again, kind of do-it-yourself problem is no one is really in charge sometimes, and everybody's busy. So, you know, a process begins, some contacts are made, there's an interview here, a few applicants come in, they're interviewed eventually. Things get busy, there's a meeting, you know, people are out of town, a week or 2 later, they interview someone else. Maybe eventually they get back to the first person who they said, well, I want to have a second interview, why don't you come in for a tour? It drags on and drags on, and no one's really keeping track of it. No one's getting back to the candidates and saying, you know, thanks for your participation. Here's the next step. Expect to hear from us in 3 days. This kind of stuff. This keeps the candidates warm because, as I said before, they've all taken a portfolio approach. They're all, hopefully, if they're smart, they've all got 4 or 5 other opportunities they're chasing. And if you're not keeping them apprised of the status of your opportunity, it's going to kind of fall to the wayside in their mind. Now we got back to the mentioned earlier, the offer process, and we're very anal about this, about wanting our clients to put forward very professional offers. No napkin offers, no verbal offers. The offer has to be read like a contract, and it has to be signed and dated, and there has to be a deadline so that the person gets the offer. And we like to put a deadline of, say, 3 business days where we will accept acceptance of that offer, or it's going to be null and void. Now, if they come back and say, well, I need an extra 2 days, I want to take it to my lawyer, sure, we can extend it, but at least we've started off with a deadline. With no deadline, the person is free to shop your offer around town. And if they are, like I said before, have multiple other opportunities, they can go to other places and say, yeah, I've got an offer here. Can you improve on it? If it was for $65,000, can you give me 75? And we don't want them doing that. We want them to have the hard choice of either accepting or rejecting our offer, or come back with a suggestion like, okay, I could come on board, but it's got to be this. And so we can get into a negotiation. And we like to, if our client will permit it, we like to be in the middle of that. And we can sometimes smooth the message going back and forth, because we don't want everybody hating each other. Or if they're going to hate somebody, we can always be us they hate, because we're not going to be in the mix forever. Whereas if this is accepted and the person joins the team, they are going to be living together. So people can get their noses out of joint on both sides and consider the offer to be insulting, or consider from the client side, consider a candidate's revised offer to be insulting. That, oh my God, look at this guy, how much he wants. This is crazy. You know, our own people aren't getting that much. So we're in the middle trying to smooth things over and say, well, you know, maybe you should modify that request, or maybe this is not really up to market standards, and we can kind of smooth off some of the rough edges, and we often do. And finally, we do recommend background checks, as I mentioned this earlier when Matt asked his question. And there are cases where this has almost gone off the rails. One case I remember was a very senior position. It was a vice president, in a case where in the interview, the client and the candidate for this VP role were very much alike. They really liked each other. They're similar in so many ways, and looked like a great fit. And then, as the final process, we did the offer, and that was signed, accepted by the candidate. And then we wanted the references so we could check them. This guy could not come up with any previous employers, individuals, even though he'd worked for several very large companies that we're all familiar with, could not give me a name of something that he'd reported to. He gave me people that had reported to him, people that had been peers, but not anybody that reported to him, that he reported to. And when we asked for permission to do a criminal background check, he refused. So to me, that was a wild red flag. We told our client that we're having trouble, and the candidate actually tried to go around us and tried to get that part of the offer waived by our client. And we told them, don't do it. There's something wrong with this. And honestly, I never found out what this, even though the person had a rather unusual last name, I Googled it like crazy, could never find out what the problem was. But we told our client, you just can't hire this guy. Like, as much as we want this deal done, it's too dangerous. We don't know what's the problem is, but there's something really rotten here, and you should pass on this candidate. We should keep going and find someone else. So that's really the sum of the mistakes that we found so far. There's many colorful stories that I'm happy to relate if someone asks, and it all goes to show that getting the right people on the bus is very important, and we have to weed through a cast of thousands to with our little list of 3 or 4 that we try to simplify for our client. And the important message to remember is be careful when you go moose hunting. Thank you very much. Any questions?
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Larry. I'm going to give people a few minutes to maybe put their questions in the Q&A button or the chat. But perhaps, how can people contact you? Do you have a contact page you can throw up there?
Well, I'll give you my my website. So it's Cathbern, KATHBERN.com.
Okay,
Pretty simple.
fantastic. All right, we'll give more people any interesting anecdotes from hiring that we can without mentioning companies.
Endless
anecdotes.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah, we had one. I mean, just in the contracting world, we had actually it was for this moose thing. The guy that called about that. So we did find several candidates to be his number 2. Really, really good. And he settled on one he really liked. The guy had owned his own business earlier, but had run into some. One of his major clients went bankrupt, and as a result, pretty much took him under as well. And but he was a good guy, and he was working now as on the tools kind of a guy again. And we thought he was a good fit because of his prior experience, been a foreman, been an owner, etc. But just had a couple of misfortunate events. And when we called references, we had several good ones, and then we had a horrible one. And we thought, this is really strange that we had this one really bad mouthing reference. And we called a couple of more and actually mentioned this individual. And then we got the scoop on the individual that they were just poison to everything and everybody. So we were able to find enough credible information to discount the bad reference. So we didn't just stop at that. We looked for more information and found enough offsetting information, and then showed it all to our client, and he was willing to overlook the bad reference in favor of the good ones. And he was hired, and he's been there for more than a dozen years now.
Excellent. I'm glad for his sake that you looked a little deeper, right?
Yeah, there's all kinds of twists and turns. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe one more question, since something that interested me in your presentation is kind of the tricks that candidates play, or not necessarily lying, but just kind of get around the process. Not to put you on the spot again, but are there any other kind of red flags to look out for when candidates like, oh, that's a common trick or that's a common deceit? Try to.
I mean, we have a code word here we use, which is called RFL, that we use in our interviewing process. When RFL stands for reason for leaving. So when we're going through someone's resume
Mhm,
and then talking about it,
mhm,
that's one of the first questions is, why did you leave the last position? And then why did you leave the one before that? And why did you leave the one before that? And we've got to hear a consistent story. And
mhm,
if it's always, well, I didn't fit in, or my boss was an idiot, if it's 3 times in a row the boss was an idiot, you start to question who was the idiot.
mhm,
So you've got to probe on that. I mean, that's a pretty important thing. Is what's the motivation for the change? Why do you want to leave, and why do you want to join us?
mhm,
It's really good to know, and it's got to make some sense. And just because people are unemployed, I mean, we have to fight with our clients sometimes. But sometimes they're very narrow-minded and will say, look, I don't want anybody who's unemployed.
mhm,
In this market, if you're unemployed in this market, you can't be any good. Well, that's not quite true. It's certainly a flag,
mhm,
but a lot of people um, have become unemployed because their company retreated from the marketplace, or there was it was a takeover, and
mhm,
they were left out of the takeover because uh, one of the primary reasons for doing a merger is to eliminate duplicate positions. And if they already have, especially in finance, if they already have a controller or a VP finance, they probably don't need another one. They can just
right.
stick your customers under and deal with it, and you're out. So you're not necessarily a bad person. So we have to fight with our clients about that. We also have to deal with compensation issues, especially recent times, where inflation is rampant, and let's face it, half of there's an average compensation for any role in the marketplace, and half of companies are under that average. That's the way averages work. Half
Mhm,
are over and half are under.
right.
And so the companies that are under are struggling to bring someone new onto their team when they realize they have to pay market rate. I mean, what they want to pay is almost irrelevant. The
Mhm,
market is the market. And so when they realize they have to pay market rate, that may be greater than what their existing people in the same role are already making. So when they come to that realization, then they realize that their whole team is at risk.
mhm,
And what they're really facing is a much bigger bill to upgrade everyone's salary to the market rate. And if you don't do it, then you're exposed to rampant turnover. And the turnover is extremely expensive. Either you're going to keep the so-called sea fish I mentioned earlier that are never leaving because they can't find a job anywhere else anyway. They'll stay
right.
with you through thick and thin. But if you're going to keep your A players, you're going to have to get close to market, and then have other things as well that may be helpful to keeping turnover down, um, in addition to compensation.
Excellent insights. I've actually got two questions lined up for you.
Yeah, sure.
So, first one's from Stephen, who says, thanks for the presentation. Very informative. Can you provide any advice from the employer's perspective when a job posting might be unrealistic? I've encountered in my research complaints before that employers oftentimes are looking for candidates who don't exist.
Uh, yeah, that can happen. I mean, we in the recruiting world, we deal with two extremes.
Hmm.
One is that one, we post something and nobody applies, or we search for things and nobody applies because it's why? What would the reasons be for that? Well, because it's such a narrow specialty that we're looking for,
Hmm.
and complicated by location. It could be that it's in a location there's nobody going to have those qualifications in that area. The nearest market that might have people might be an hour away. So
Hmm.
now you're into convincing somebody to relocate, which is not impossible, but a lot harder. So the location, we have to do special strategies to help people that. But if it's not location, if it's in Toronto, say, where you can't say location's a problem, then it may be that the criteria are just too restrictive. people are putting a ton of restrictions. Whereas what you want to do when you're posting a job is to lure people to apply. After they've applied and you have 25 people applying, then you can go through them and decide who you should throw out. But if you make it so restrictive at the beginning, then no one's applying and you don't have anybody to throw out.
Hmm.
So you've got to open up the doors with a fairly loose job outline that will encourage people to apply. Now, you don't want to waste your time by having every Tom, Dick, and Harry. You'll often get that anyway. But you want to open it up so that you're going to get 50 or 25, 50, 100 candidates coming in, then you are in the driver's seat to sort them out.
Excellent. This one's from Amy. Do you have any tricks for skimming through bulk applications like you'd receive on Indeed to determine which could be candidates to reach out to? So I just wave through those 100 people. How do you even
Yeah.
start?
Hi,
Yeah.
Amy. Yeah, Amy and I know each other.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Amy. Yeah, that's the other extreme. I didn't get to say that in the answer the last question. So the one extreme is nobody applies, right? So then you've got to open it up, make it looser so you can be in the driver's seat. The opposite extreme is on certain positions that you will get 400 applicants, and in some of the tools like Indeed allows you to ask questions that the candidate doesn't know the answer to. So if they don't answer with the proper information, then their application you'll never see it. It just gets put into the round file immediately. So then you can screen. So if you're determined that you have to have somebody with 5 years experience, say, for this role, then the question would be, how many years of experience do you have in doing this? And if the person says anything less than 5, you'll never see it. So you can take that kind of a strategy, and we do that if we have roles that we know are going to result in hundreds, then you can save yourself some time.
Thank you. Another question came in. Some jobs need licenses and certificates that you cannot apply unless you have these to do the job. But how do you get those specific applicants? Does that make
Well,
sense?
again, some of the hiring platforms allow you to ask a question that asks that very information. And if somebody,
Right.
I mean, they can lie. You say, do you have your Red Seal certificate? And they can say, yes, I do. And then, when you get their resume, no such thing is there, or you talk to them, no such thing, they've wasted your time. But that's kind of the minority. Most people would say, no, I don't have that. And in which case you'll never see it. If you put that screen on there. And you don't have to use these screens. You can leave them all off and then you'll get everybody. But if you're getting a flood of applications, then you can put the screens on and cut your workload.
All right. A lot of really good questions, folks. I don't see any more right now, so I think we can give people a few minutes back for lunch.
Yeah, and anybody would like to email or call, my email address is larry.smith@kathbern, KATHBERN, like in Norman.com. Feel free to email me anytime and we'll have a chat.
I've actually got one more question for you.
Yeah.
It was 11th hour question, but it's a good one. What are your thoughts in regards to highly qualified foreign experience, but no Canadian experience? What are employers' preferences there?
My preference personally is to have a good look and see what is being offered. There is, I'll say, an employer bias against that. Employers, oftentimes without real need, will insist on Canadian experience. Whereas if especially in a trade, when you find out through interviewing, they've done the job. The real concern would be not that they can't do the job. I mean, electricity is the same the world over. Well, there are some differences, but in general, the knowledge is the same. The concerns you might have would be cultural. And this does come up occasionally, where it's language. is a concern, of course,
Mhm.
and culture as to just whether they're going to fit into your organization. And many times these concerns are overblown and it's overly restrictive. So, but if the employer is the employer, the client's our client, and we will do what they want them to do, but we will try to encourage them to open their minds up on this subject, as well as many others. Uh, I'll just give you one more example on opening their mind. We had a client recently, IT company, and we did our thing. We sent over, I think, three what we thought was good candidates. Buried in those three was someone that I had known for 10 years. And I knew that they did not on paper have the strict qualifications that would be required. But I also knew that they probably could do the job. So we sent the three over. The client came back within an hour saying, nope, don't want to see any of them. Nobody here has any interest. So then I picked up the phone, called the client and said, look, I strongly urge to see all three of them, because the interviewing process isn't altogether about screening these individuals. It is about that, but it's not just about that. In speaking with people, live people, whether it's on Zoom or in person, you will learn more about what you really need. You'll learn more about yourself and this role by going through that process. I find that really hard to explain to people. But anyway, he said, no, yeah, okay, you guys are professionals. You know what you're doing. I'll listen to you. I will see all three of them. So sure enough, we set the interviews up when they went, and he saw all three of them. And the person that I mentioned, that I'd known for 10 years, they fell in love instantly. They were similar personalities, and he saw that the person, even though they were not a on paper fit, it would work. And so sure enough, a couple of interviews later, this person had the job. And I spoke to them both a week ago, and this was like 6 months later, and they're all extremely happy. So sometimes we have to power over our clients' initial concerns about whether it's culture, foreign, or whether it's just more of like, does this person a perfect, round hole, round peg fit for this job or not? We try to encourage them to open their minds up and consider people that look like they might be kind of a little bit outside the search, just to open their brains up sometimes. Not always easy, but we do it.
Thank you so much, Larry. And I think that will do it. So a lot of great questions. Thank you so much for everyone putting those in and for showing up. And please, for the attendees, for the people watching this, go to HRAI's webpage. We have a list of upcoming events of future webinars. And I hope Larry will join us for one of those future webinars, because this has been a good topic. So we'll plan that. But we've got a bunch more webinars coming up. Feel free to join us, usually around Tuesdays and Thursdays. But with that, I will say adieu to Larry. Thank you again.
Thanks all. Enjoyed it.
See you all again soon.
Okay, bye now.
Take care. Cheers. Thanks again, Larry. Cheers.
Thank you, Matt.